I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of theCorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you for having me back. Pleasure to be here as always.
What kind of economic waves are hitting Japan right now?
Well, the most significant event that's taking place right now is, as is often the case, is in relation to the U.S. dollar. It's the U.S. dollar-Japanese yen rate has been changing quite rapidly lately. In fact, since September 30, the U.S. dollar has rallied against the Japanese yen, the sharpest and steepest rally that it has seen against the yen since the third quarter of 1995. So there's a significant strengthening of the dollar going on right now, which is probably related to a number of factors, but one of those factors has to be the Bank of Japan's September announcement of their new policy, where they're going to be committing to maintaining a near zero rate for their 10-year government bond by hook or by crook. And in the meantime, of course, the investors are preparing for the Federal Reserve to start hiking rates again, and probably again and again in 2017. At least that's what's being prepared for right now. So the discrepancy, the increasing discrepancy between those rates are at least part of what's going on here. And as a result, we've seen the U.S. dollar rising against the yen, and there are some analysts predicting that it could even surpass the 125.86 yen to the dollar, which was the high mark reached in June of 2015. So they're expecting it might even go past that point before things start settling down.
Is that a big effect on the Japanese economy?
Well, given that Japan is still a highly export-dependent nation and import-dependent for its energy needs, that has a huge effect on the economy. Generally, overall, it is to the good. Of course, it does increase the price of energy that is imported to the country, but since there's so much export manufacturing that goes on here, it is a net win for most people in most industries. So it does have a huge effect on the economy generally, and this is part of what Abe has really been gunning for the last few years, really, is to get inflation going here, to depreciate the yen against the dollar and other currencies in order to stimulate the export-based economy. And that's what's happening right now. I don't think you could say this is Abe's doing, but this is certainly what he wants, and this is what the Japanese economy wants at this particular time.
Prime Minister Abe, the first standing Japanese prime minister to visit Pearl Harbor. Is that a big deal?
Yes, of course. And of course, we also saw earlier this year President Obama's historic visit to Hiroshima. So clearly some pretty big and significant things. But those are significant diplomatically and in terms of, history, but probably more important for what is happening and what is about to happen, economically and politically and otherwise, is the meeting between Abe and Putin. And even Abe and Modi, the Indian prime minister. There's been some diplomatic goings-on that have had significant results. Abe and Modi were signing a nuclear pact for Japan to provide nuclear technologies to India. And Putin was visiting economic fora and such things in Tokyo and meeting with the prime minister. And as I believe we might have discussed in a previous appearance on this program, they're at least thinking about or raising the possibility that they may actually formally conclude World War II by settling on the Kuril Islands and who will ultimately take control of them, which seems like a silly thing to can still technically not have concluded the Second World War over, but to this day, Japan and Russia still have those issues, and it has made diplomatic relations not quite so cozy, as you can imagine. And so this is a significant step, and I think it shows that in this era of the incoming Trump administration, where Abe really doesn't know to what extent the U.S. is going to remain the number one rock-solid trading ally of Japan, I think this shows that there is some spreading of the wings going on right now, and potentially some very tectonic shifts that are occurring if Japan does turn westward and starts looking at Russia and China and places like that.
Yeah, and we don't think of those places being westward, but yes, they are in Japan.
Relative.
Right, and India, some people predict, will become the world's biggest economy. It'll take them a while, but once they get going, they'll be a monster.
It's certainly, it could be, and it should be for a lot of demographic reasons. Obviously, it's the world's largest democracy, anyway, they like to say, as opposed to China, which is just the largest country by population. But it's a huge country, and it does have a lot of potential. It is obviously, I think, notoriously overrun with bureaucracy that does not function very well, and there is a lot of corruption, graft, incompetence, and that was reflected, in fact, in the recent demonetization of the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes that Prime Minister Modi suddenly announced in a dramatic fashion on live television, said, oh, and by the way, the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes will be demonetized as of tonight. You have two and a half months to turn in your notes at the bank or post office. And that announcement came with a whole bunch of stipulations, and, well, you can cash this amount if you're a farmer, or this amount if you're using an ATM, or this amount if you live in this city. It came with all those types of bureaucratic red tape that you would imagine would happen in any Indian policy. So there's been a lot of confusion, chaos. There's been people queuing up for hours outside of banks and going crazy, generally trying to bring all their cash in. Because this represents 80% of the cash by value that's circulating in the Indian economy. It's not an insignificant move that they just did. And at the time, of course, the number one reason for this, at least given lip service by Modi, was that they were going to be cleaning up the black money in the economy, as they call it. Of course, money, meaning money that is not accounted for by the government, that the banking system and the government don't know about and thus can't tax. This is an attempt to rein in that problem by making sure everybody has to bring their money in through the banking system so that the government can properly account for it and know where that money is. That was the main reason that was given. But I think an ulterior reason is that the Indian economy is being prepped bit by bit towards going in a more cashless direction. And in fact, just in that same week that Modi made that demonetization announcement and the mad scramble to cash in all of those rupees began, Bill Gates, of all people, was visiting and had actually addressed Modi's cabinet and was saying that he believes that India will be the one of the leaders in the world to go towards a completely cashless economy. And lo and behold, now, just breaking news from Bloomberg, there is an Indian panel that was commissioned by the Parliament that has just come back with its recommendation to Prime Minister Modi that they should offer tax incentive to citizens to make purchases through digital modes of payment and penalize cash transactions. Please ring a bell if this sounds familiar to you, because this is happening in a lot of different countries around the world, including, I know, in Canada, through various programs, and the Canadian government making it harder to pay with cash for interacting with the government bureaucracy itself. So I know this is happening a lot around the world, but it is, of course, now they're starting to get the gears working in India as well.
Well, I know governments want to know what kind of money you have because they want to get their hands on it somewhere.
Of course, any money that is not within their purview is, of course, tainted just by value because of that fact. So, of course, this is definitely about trying to basically tax the other part of the economy. It's estimated as much as 20% of the Indian economy is transacting between people without the government knowing about it. So they don't have that as a part of the tax base. So this could generate billions of dollars of revenue ultimately for the Indian government.
What kind of a message is that sending to the rest of the world, especially in Japan, where they still like to deal with cash?
Yes, well, it is. I mean, each nation has its own situation, and it's approaching it differently, in its own cultural background and other factors. But this is definitely a worldwide phenomenon, and it is taking place all over the world right now. I launched an open source investigation on CorbettReport.com several months ago now, where I got the members of the Corbett Report community to submit stories from their part of the world, and we compiled a list of, I think it was 3 or 4 dozen different countries around the world that all were implementing various different programs towards coercing or inducing their citizens to go cashless. And Japan, no exception to that. It's more of a organic phenomenon here. People are largely driven by technology trends and whatever's trendy here. So one example of that, Apple Pay just launched in Japan just a month or two ago, and it's gradually becoming more prevalent, at least in terms of you see it at point of sale in the stores. Not sure it's exactly taking the world by fire yet, but I imagine that those types of payment systems are going to become more and more common and start replacing cash payments, which, as you say, really is the bulk of the Japanese economy at this point. It is not at all unusual for people to pay with what would be the equivalent of $110 bill, $120 bill, whatever the exchange rate is right now, for a stick of gum in a convenience store. They wouldn't even bat their eyelid at that at this point. So it is still very much a cash-dependent society, but that is changing.
Right, and of course, in Seattle, they're now experimenting with a cashier-less, no checkout grocery store where you have an app on your telephone and it automatically bills you for whatever you picked up in the supermarket.
Brought to you by Jeff Bezos' Amazon, which, of course, Jeff Bezos, also the owner of the Washington Post, which also recently smeared the Corbett Report and a lot of other websites by insinuating they were Russian propaganda. So, yes, that's Bezos' other interest, is coming up with gimmicks like that. And yes, they're talking about the fact that Amazon may launch as many as 2,000 of these stores, but I think that's just a number that's being thrown around for the press releases at the moment. Anyway, as you say, they are getting set to launch some sort of trial version of this in Seattle.
I like going to grocery stores that still have cashiers, because you can go through the check yourself out lineup. I went, well, I'm not an expert at this, and they seem to do a good job for me.
I hate doing it myself. I would much prefer to have a human being doing it, but and I think most people agree, but there are those who prefer, and well, they're going to get their way increasingly, I think.
Well, I tried to check out one item by myself, and it took me, 5-10 minutes. So you're not saving any time a lot of days.
Well, with the new Amazon Go stores, there will be no checkout of any sort. You just walk out the store and it'll automatically charge you. So goodbye headaches, goodbye lineups.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the 4th largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking to James Corbett. James, a little bit of panic in China as they decide to reset the limit of money that you can take out of the country.
That's right. There is a $50,000 cap on the amount of yuan that the Chinese public are allowed to convert into foreign currencies each year. And now that cap is going to be renewed, I believe, later this month. And as a result, they are expecting a large capital outflow during the month of December from Chinese citizens who are going to max out their cap and basically try to get their money out because the yuan is depreciating right now. It's the weakest that it's been in a decade and continuing to go downwards. And as a result, there are more people who are incentivized to be getting their money out of China and into U.S. dollars or anywhere else, or into property in Vancouver, as you well know. So as a result, it's something of a spiral. The yuan depreciates, so people move more money out. So the yuan depreciates further, so people move more money out. And so they are expecting. It could be the estimate has been thrown around that if even 1% of the Chinese public maxed out their cap of the $50,000, that would be equivalent to $650 to $700 billion that would be fleeing the country this month. Not sure if that will ultimately transpire, but at any rate, that puts into perspective the type of tsunami of capital outflows that the Chinese government is looking at, and looking at trying to stem or stave off in some manner.
Well, foreign buying in Vancouver was already drastically down when they introduced the 15% foreign buyer tax, but Ontario doesn't have any such tax, and Toronto real estate is still booming.
There certainly can be a relation there, can't there? And I think certainly Chinese money is continuing to look for different outlets, and Ontario would be a more amenable investment now that 15% tax is in BC.
And of course, too, 15%. What if you have a friend or a relative in Vancouver that you trust? A little gift, perhaps, and the next thing you know, they're buying real estate on your behalf, and yet it's in their name.
Well, as they found out in the Soviet era, whenever you put in any kind of government regulation, there will be people who find a way around that regulation. So I think there's probably no difference with this, these types of taxes and capital controls. Again, even though there is a $50,000 cap on how much foreign currency individuals can convert each year, obviously there are people who get much, much more money out of the country by using shady practices and using friends and family to get the money out, and by hook or by crook buying multi-million-dollar shacks in British Columbia for all intents and purposes. So again, these types of numbers are aspirations more than they are operational working max limits. But all the same, there are still expected to be a large amount of people that will be shipping money out of the country this month, and it will be interesting to see how the People's Bank of China reacts to that, because they do have, of course, very, very large reserves in the trillions of dollars, but hundreds of billions leaving the country in a single month can certainly eat into those types of reserves.
Well, Toronto does have the first yuan trading hub in North America, which could be another reason why they're getting this money.
Yes, I think this is an important aspect of what's going on right now. China is working on, in various different ways, trying to find ways to trade bilateral trade with a number of different countries settled in local currencies, rather than having to go through U.S. dollars, and setting up their own SWIFT type of system, in order to directly transfer money through different correspondent banks in different countries. They have the one that's being sold in Toronto, in London, in other major financial centers now. So they are definitely trying to internationalize the currency, and I think part of that is so that there won't be these large outflows, these large bleeding of the yuan outwards. There will be more incentive for people to maintain their holdings in yuan. That's obviously still some ways away from realization, but at any rate, that's clearly what the Chinese government is working toward.
Former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney says Donald Trump will be good for Canada. He knows Donald Trump and thinks he'll continue to have positive business dealings. However, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been doing his best to open up new trade routes, trade agreements with other countries other than the U.S. because people don't know what Trump's going to do.
Well, that is the point. People don't know what Trump is going to do, and I think probably people on both supporters and detractors of Trump will probably be surprised. I imagine that people haven't quite caught on to the fact that the way that he operates as a businessman is to keep people guessing and keep people off center and off gravity, so that he has a negotiating advantage. So a lot of the things that he talks about or tweets about are not necessarily things that he's, I think, going to work on enacting. Clearly, I think he is looking at renegotiating the relationship with Canada, and he's certainly talked about scrapping NAFTA. He's called it disaster, and he has said that Canada is on the free dump hit list, along with China, Mexico, Japan, and Vietnam. So clearly there's signs that there is going to be a shifting of the relationship. But again, I don't think we know what that's going to look like necessarily. And it is certainly possible that this could ultimately be to the benefit of Canadian business or certain Canadian businesses, certain industries maybe. But I imagine that there's going to probably be a lot more leverage on the U.S. side. And ultimately, when the mouse is playing with the elephant, what the elephant wants, the elephant usually tends to get.
Right. And this is unprecedented. Ruling by tweet.
It is a brave new world that we're moving into. It is going to be extremely interesting. And again, I imagine that Trump is still in business mode and still likes to project outward signs of wanting to do this thing or that thing in order to confuse people or keep people guessing about his real motivations. I think that's part of what's going on right now. So that, for example, he can make a tweet at 4 a.m. or whatever it was, saying that maybe we should strip the U.S. citizenship of anyone who burns the flag. And, of course, for 24 hours, the news cycle is dominated by this subject, despite the fact that it is exceedingly unlikely, I would imagine, that he's going to try to make some kind of constitutional amendment, which would no doubt be required to repeal the First Amendment in order to pass such a law. I don't think that's feasible. I don't think this is really an order of business. I think that it's just an example of how a news cycle can be completely dominated by a tweet. And that is, I suppose, to Trump's advantage, as he can certainly use that to obscure other things from getting in the news that he probably doesn't want to be in the news.
Right, and he just tweeted as well, Boeing, your $4 billion Air Force One replacement is too expensive, so forget about it. Right,
which Boeing immediately issued a correction of sorts, although they didn't address the tweet directly. They did say that the actual replacement program was, I can't remember the exact figure, but it was something more like $170 million. So, again, and there was some White House official was saying, quoting a 2-point-something billion dollar number. So I really don't know what the ultimate number actually is, but it doesn't seem like that $4 billion has a basis in reality. Again, I think this is probably more of a diversionary tactic, as the Air Force One replacement contract is not exactly the highest priority for the United States' $19 trillion in debt economy at the moment.
And I was going to say, too, perhaps building the 747 would be $170 million, but you have to equip it with things like flares and anti-radar devices and escape pods. That's where you start to add billions of dollars to added value, and perhaps that doesn't all go to Boeing. And anti-gravity pods and gateways to another dimension. Whatever kind of secret technology they have, yes, one can imagine this is not a regular plane. And that's, again, I don't think this is the type of thing that could actually, it would be extremely difficult to go with a different vendor. It could be done, of course, but I imagine there's a lot more to constructing Air Force One than there is to constructing probably any other plane on the planet. So, again, I don't really take this seriously as something that's fundamentally going to change the way the government is working. But it does, at the very least, play into his persona that he crafted on the campaign trail of this is the person who's going to go in and get every cent that he can back for the American people. So it certainly plays well to his base. James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. I'm Jim Goddard. If you have any comments for our show or questions, you can email us at info@howstreet.com. Thanks for listening to the show.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.